Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. I am here to do my top 10. I said that and then I wasn't sure. Hang on. 1, 2, 3. Yes, my top 10 books of 2020. I realize that a lot of people put their videos out at the end of December, but I didn't. Simply because I just wanted to wait until the year was well and over and then, you know, give myself the first few days of January to really reflect. And there was always a possibility that I would finish a really good book in the last few days of December and then therefore it wouldn't make the video. So it's coming to you early January and I hope that that's okay. These are going to be in no particular order because that's hard. These are just the 10 books that stuck out to me in 2020, and I'll obviously go into the reasons why they have lingered in my brain. But first, let's talk about stats, because I love stats. I know a lot of booktubers do like a dedicated stats video, but I'm not smart enough for that. I don't have spreadsheets and stuff to show people. I just scribble it in my notebook from Goodreads, so you're dealing with the budget version here of a booktuber. It's like there's BookTube and then this is like the Ryanair of BookTube is this channel, so I hope that's okay. So in the year 2020 I read 52 books, which works out to 16,833 pages. My worst reading months were January and February, where I read a grand total of 0 books. 0 books in January, 0 books in February, because I was having a good old nightmare of a time prepping 2 grad films ready to shoot in February and also handing in a dissertation that was due in February. So understandable, no books were read in January, February. And my best reading month was October, where I read 10 books, which is nice because October was my birthday, so I feel like that's quite, I don't know, quite a nice stat. And that's as technical as we're gonna get in terms of stats. And as well, a lot of booktubers do like a 2021 goals, reading goals, and literally my only goal every year is just to read 100 books, and every year I lower it. So I'm not gonna make a whole video because that would be a very short video of me just saying that. So yeah. See, you're getting 3 videos rolled into one very mediocre video. You're getting a best books of 2020, you're getting the stats video, and also the resolutions goals video. You're getting it all in one because, as I said, the Ryanair of BookTube. It's me. And in these videos I've seen a lot of people talk about what they think are the objective best books of the year and then what their favourite books of the year. So like there are books that they think, you know, objectively are, you know, good quality, well written, important books, but then they're just the books that they enjoyed the most, and those can be 2 different lists. However, I don't do that. I feel like I just want to talk about the books that stuck out to me the most. This is all on like personal preference. So if you look at my 2020 reading list and you're like, oh, but you read this book which is like really highly acclaimed and really important but it wasn't on your list. Yeah, maybe, but I'm going on books that, one, were my favourites of the year, but also ones that just lingered for some reason, and I'll obviously go into those reasons once I talk about the books. So without further ado, I'm going to talk about my top 10 books of 2020. In no particular order, we are starting with My Sister the Serial Killer, which I loved. I knew I would. I read it in one sitting. It's very short, and also the chapters are very short. They're like 1 to 2 pages each. I just flew through it, as a lot of other people have. The title sort of gives it away. It's about these 2 sisters. One of them is a serial killer and the other one has to grapple with the fact that her sister is a serial killer and also is partly responsible for helping her sister clean up and kind of hide her murders and the secrets. And it all basically comes to a head when the serial killer sister sets her sights on someone that her sister likes at her work, and then basically the sister, who's not a serial killer, has to decide whether or not to kind of finally intervene and put a stop to all of this, and it's just wonderful. It's dark and it's funny and it's an absurd situation. Like, you can't imagine anyone ever having this as a problem that they have to deal with, but it's just very entertaining to watch people deal with a very surreal problem and the kind of repercussions that come with that. And I think it's a very difficult balance to strike because obviously it's quite a dark storyline. People die in this book, obviously, and you know, obviously that's not funny, and obviously the topic of serial killers is not one that we want to trivialise. I know that because I watch a lot of true crime, and there's certain brands of true crime that just aim to kind of capitalise and entertain people with stories of, you know, gore and violence, and that's not cool because that happens in the real world to real people, and it's not great to trivialize it. But this book does a great job of having an entertaining, fast-paced, gripping atmosphere, but then also the characters within it feel like real people, and it kind of goes into potentially the reasons why the sisters behave in the ways that they do, and that's very interesting, and so I would recommend this. The second book needs no explanation, and it's The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I discovered it this year after everyone else did. I know I'm always late to the party, but this book is wonderful, gripped. It had me completely gripped within the first page, and a lot of these books are like that. Actually, I'm looking at my pile, and a lot of them are books that I've read in one sitting or two, and you know, have just devoured because I've just been so captured by the first page or the first sentence, and this was definitely one of those books. And one of the greatest joys of this year was recommending this to my friend Rowan, and she read it and loved it and then recommended it to her sister. It's just so nice to see people in real time like actually reading what you read and then like messaging you about it. That's one of my greatest joys, which is why I started a booktube. But then there's a sad side of that, and one of the greatest despairs is recommending someone a book and then they don't enjoy it, and then you feel partially responsible for that. I'm very sorry. Another book that lingered in my brain this year was Death in Her Hands by Tesha Mosfet, and this was such an interesting book, and I remember being so, I mean, I talked about it in my wrap-up that month, but I remember being really conflicted about this because not a lot happens in this book. It is unsatisfying in a lot of ways, and the main character is just not very likable. It's an unreliable narrator, and you're put in this very strange headspace, and then you're just kind of pulled out of it at the end quite abruptly, and you're just kind of left to deal with that on your own, and you're like, wait, what? Which is why it's not necessarily a book that I would say I really enjoyed. I found it very interesting and I was very compelled by it, but it definitely lingers, and that's why it's going on this list, simply because I think it's a very interesting book, and it's one that would be great to discuss with somebody who has read it, because there's just a lot here without it being too substantial. I don't know if that makes any sense. So the basic premise of this book is this woman finds a note in the woods saying, what does the note say? The note says, "Her name was Magda. Nobody will ever know who killed her. It wasn't me. Here is her dead body." So this woman who's walking in the woods finds this note and is kind of perplexed by it. At first she's like, oh, it's a joke, it's a practical joke, because there's no body. She looks around, obviously, as you would if you found a note like that. There's no body, and she's kind of like, well, what is going on? And it really sticks with her, and she tries to kind of tell herself she's being silly. And then she just gradually just gets more and more obsessed with finding out whether or not this note means anything and who Magda was. The village that she lives in is like a very small, isolated village, so there's only like a small pool of people that, you know, would have known her, and everyone knows everybody type thing. So she really tries to work out, like, is this a possibility? Like, was there someone named Magda who knew her, who could have done this? And it's really quite a strange book, because this woman, she's widowed, and then over the course of the novel you learn more about the state of her marriage, and what it was like before her husband died, and you kind of get an insight into this lonely life. And maybe that's why she's getting so wrapped up in this note mystery, because she has nothing else really to fulfill her. And it's just very interesting. It's just putting you into the headspace of someone that you would never really meet ever, because this is a kind of person that spends a lot of their time alone. So yeah, it's very interesting and definitely would recommend this. The next one is the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, which I gushed about when I read it. It's just, I think this is flawless, and I don't usually say that. Usually with books, I'm very stingy with my 5-star ratings, and if you get a 5-star rating, it's like a new all-time favourite, like there was nothing that could have made it better, and that's how I felt with this book. I loved the setting of, you know, the South, and I thought it was very well done in the way that they incorporate race into this book and white privilege, and basically the way that housewives have been traditionally undervalued and underappreciated and almost, you know, mocked as well. I'm not going to say almost, they have been mocked, you know, it's seen as like a lowly thing. So the basic premise of this book is that a strange individual moves into this small town, and the local Southern book club full of housewives with not a lot going on in their lives, basically start to get very suspicious of this man and who he is, and they try and prove it to the town and their husbands, and they get very swiftly kind of mocked and put down and told to just, you know, stay in the kitchen, stick to what you do best, you know, very patronizing, like. And they don't want to listen to that shit because obviously that sucks. So, and this book is honestly equal parts fun, equal parts gory, equal parts violent and vicious and creepy, equal part like infuriating and also heartwarming. I don't know, I just was so gripped by this, and this is another one of those books that I talked about, ones where I read it in literally 1 or 2 sittings. I just had to find out where my characters were going to end up, what was going to happen, and I really recommend this. Another standout favourite of the year has been Saltwater by Jessica Andrews, and I said in my wrap up that this is kind of a book that I wish I had written, or I was reading this and the writing style was so beautiful that I was like, this is a book that I wish I could write one day, or I could write at this level one day. That's the dream. The plot itself is quite sparse. It's very vague in a sense. It's basically a series of vignettes, and it's quite a transient novel. It skips around between past, present, and it, you know, it has little vignettes of the main character Lucy and her family, and then, you know, the extended family, and it just looks at the little moments and the little memories and the little things that make up who we are. But it's beautifully written, and the author also writes poetry, so I think that's partly the explanation for why it's written so wonderfully, and it's just so visual and visceral, and I just remember reading this and just feeling like utterly kind of swept away, and because it jumps around so much, it really creates that feeling of being lost and not really knowing who you are and having all these disparate parts of yourself and you're not really sure how to connect them, and I feel like that was really well done. So yeah, I would definitely recommend this if that sounds like something that you would enjoy. This year I also read Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Rennie Edo-Lodge, which is obviously a very important book, but it's also a very readable book. I don't hear people saying that enough. It's actually quite an enjoyable reading experience for, you know, despite the subject matter. The subject matter is obviously very difficult to read about. It's about systemic racism in our society, and that has been there and is still here, and if that's a surprise to you, definitely read this book. But the way she writes is very accessible, it's very readable. She talks a lot about her personal experiences as well as just the history and the kind of academic side of it. I didn't want to use the word academic because that can often turn people off of reading non-fiction. I know it has for me in the past, but this doesn't read like a traditional kind of academic text. It doesn't at all. It's very readable, it's very personal, and I really would recommend this for everybody. Another favourite of the year was Love, Frankie, and if you saw my like unboxing video, where it was not an unboxing, I just ordered this book for myself, you will know how much I love Jacqueline Wilson and how much I was looking forward to reading this, and it did not disappoint. I read all 432 pages in one day. I love it. Jacqueline Wilson has such a wonderful, readable style, and this book follows Frankie, who over the course of the novel thinks that she's developing feelings for her female best friend, and it's about her grappling with her sexuality and how to navigate that around her family and her friends and at her school. And it's just a lovely, lovely novel and a really lovely standout of the year for me. The next one is one that I wasn't sure if it would make it onto my top 10 of the year. I didn't think it would at the time. And that is The Starless Sea. And I said in my wrap up that this is one of those books where the reading experience was quite frustrating, because it is very, I don't know how, it's like, there are so many different threads and it takes a very long time for them to finally link up and for you to finally have that penny drop moment of like, okay, I know what this is about, I know where we're headed, I know how these things all match up. And it can be quite frustrating. I saw a great review on Goodreads for this book that said it was like if Alice fell down the rabbit hole to Wonderland and instead of trying to get home just wandered around Wonderland for a while. That is the best explanation of this book I've heard. We follow Zachary, who after a strange encounter where he finds a book in a library that basically tells stories from his life, he finds himself descending into the Starless Sea, which is this insane labyrinth underground of books and strange characters and strange rooms and it meanders and it uncoils, and the further away you get from the center of the library, time distorts and people get lost between the shelves and people have gone missing. And it's a very strange novel, and it's a very challenging novel. I think it tests your patience quite a lot. But once I got to the ending and it was revealed to me basically why this book was written, you know, this book is essentially at its core, it's about endings and about how hard it is for us to let go of the stories that we love. And that's essentially the crux of the novel, and that doesn't really become clear until you reach the end. So the writing is beautiful, but just beware, if you're going into this book, you might have to persevere, and it will feel frustrating at the time, but once I'd finished it and the more I thought about it, it just grew on me and grew on me and grew on me, and I just appreciate it so much as an experiment, as an undertaking, because it must have taken so much brain power and so much time and effort and love to craft this story and deliver it in a way that makes sense in the end and comes together. And I'm in complete awe of it, to be honest, and it is one of those books that did kind of burrow into my soul, and I love that about books. Obviously, like, there are books that I enjoy in the moment and I love, and then if I forget about them a couple of months later, still an enjoyable experience. But I just really appreciate books that have that staying power, that can really kind of make you think about them months or years after you read them. Another favourite of the year was Mythos, which I talked about very recently, and it is just Stephen Fry retelling the Greek myths, and I love Greek myths, I love Stephen Fry, I love this audiobook, which I've also mentioned before, because Stephen Fry is an actor and he acts out all the funny voices of the Greek gods and everything, and it was just a wonderful experience, like rediscovering these myths and mythology and fairy tales are so ingrained in our society, so whenever you hear one it feels familiar, but also you're excited because there are things that you've forgotten, and they're just such a staple of storytelling and such a kind of instinctual thing to want to hear about. I don't know, you know, when you hear the words once upon a time, you just instantly, like, you're a kid again and you just want to listen to a story. And I feel like myths have that same effect. And in this book you can tell that Stephen Fry is very much an advocate for what am I trying to say? It's not elitist. I was trying to say like de-eliticizing. That doesn't make any sense at all. Classics and the study of Greek mythology and Roman history and all of that can often be seen as something that kind of scholars undertake, and you know, it's a sign of being very clever. You know, if you've read The Secret History, you'll know that, you know, it's like a point of pride to be like a classic student and, like, you know, surround yourself in the romance of like myth and folklore. But Stephen Fry is very much like, at the core, these are just stories, and he really strips away all of those kind of academic and scholarly barriers, and he just makes these stories very accessible and very readable. And I really appreciate that, because history should be accessible for anyone who can pick up a book and wants to read and find out about it. There shouldn't be barriers to these stories just because they're old, and sometimes you have to kind of wot away like academic text to get to them. You know, it's just a very accessible, wonderful retelling, and it's very enjoyable, and I would recommend it. And the last book I have to talk about is 8 Detectives by Alex Pavesi. If you've been on this channel for a while, you will know that I am a huge Agatha Christie stan. I have been inhaling Agatha Christie books since I was about 9 years old, probably too early, and one of my best films over the last few years has been Knives Out. I just love this genre, I love crime. I just love that the genre has so many staples, so many kind of tropes, and then every book that kind of adds to the lexicon finds a way to reinvent those tropes or use them in a new way, and I just love that. Whenever I read a book like this, I feel like I'm accessing like a very textured, layered tapestry. Each new book just adds a new layer onto like the peppered history of cozy crime novels, because it's like borrowing from all of these books that have gone before. You don't feel like you're reading one book, you feel like you get like a window into like lots of different books. I don't know if that makes sense. But I really loved this novel. I loved how readable it was. I loved how compelled I was. I loved how fast I finished it. It was another one of those books where I read it in 1 or 2 sittings, and I just loved it. And it centers around a reclusive author who publishes a PhD about the mathematical ways in which crime novels are set out. So he works out mathematically like all the different tropes and how they can interact. So like picture like Venn diagrams and like all the different tropes and like all the different kind of versions of a crime story that you can have. And then he follows that up with a little fiction collection of short stories where he puts his PhD research into practice, and he writes the stories that he kind of outlined in this PhD, all the different possibilities of endings for crime novels. And then after he publishes those, he dips, and years later, Julia, I think her name is working at a publisher, and she wants to republish this short story collection, and so she has to track him down on this deserted island, and then they talk, and she realizes that he might not be who he says he is, or like things might not be as they seem, and it's very mysterious. It has so many layers. It has a reclusive author, a deserted island, and the way that it's set out is that you get to read the short stories from the collection, and then you also get peppered throughout the conversations between the reclusive author and the publisher, and it just all wraps up so wonderfully in ways that you don't expect, and I just thoroughly enjoyed this reading experience, and I would recommend it if you like this genre. So there you have it. Those are my best books of 2020, and I really hope that I read some more that I like just as much in 2021. As always, please let me know if you've read any of the books that I mentioned and what you thought of them, and also what your favourite books of 2020 were. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you soon with another one soon. Bye.